Now, we also know that a carbon tax increases the price of doing business here in Canada. The Liberals seem loath to hear that point. Yet, this Liberal government announced that carbon tax relief for big polluters will happen for here in Canada. Why? Well, we all know why. Because our competitors do not have a carbon tax.
$0 go to government. This is not a tax at all. I have said it is a pricing mechanism for consumers. It will be 1/3 the pricing of Mr. Trudeau's ever-rising carbon tax, but nothing goes to government. It is not a tax.
Conservative leader Erin O'Toole unveiled a new climate plan today, and it includes carbon pricing. Under a Conservative government, Canadians would pay a carbon tax of $20 per ton of greenhouse gas emissions to start. That rises to $50 per ton eventually, but no higher. The current Liberal government's carbon tax is $40 per ton, and that's due to rise to $170 per ton by 2030. The Conservatives would put the revenues from their plan into what they call a personal low-carbon savings account. Canadians could use the funds in those accounts to buy green things like a bus pass or an electric vehicle. Under the Liberals, 90% of the revenue collected is returned to consumers through rebates. The remaining revenues go to businesses, schools, hospitals, and municipalities. Dan Albas is the Conservatives' critic for environment and climate change. He's with us here in Ottawa. Hi, Mr. Albas. Good to have you on the show tonight. Thank you very much for making the time.
Hi, Vashi.
Your party, Mr. Albas, has spent years decrying the Liberals' carbon tax, saying it's ineffective, inefficient, and hurtful to ordinary Canadians. Yet today you're proposing a carbon tax of sorts on consumers. Is that not hypocritical?
Well, let's start by saying that, first of all, a tax itself is a compulsory levy that the state collects and then uses it for its own revenues. So when Mr. Trudeau put in place a carbon tax, and let's be mindful, in 2019, he was actually saying that they would not go past $50. Now they're talking about $170 a ton carbon tax. That is so punishing to many of the small businesses that right now are just struggling to get by. Look, I come from a region that there is often no public transportation, and a lot of seniors end up having to drive for medical appointments to get vaccinated. They don't have the access to public transit, and so the carbon tax to them has been very punitive and doesn't help them to insulate their homes. It doesn't help them, to be able to make better choices. I'm very proud to say, Vashi, that we've come together with a plan for a low-carbon savings account, one for personal use for a household or for small business. And that's really going to allow for people that when we have this price on carbon, and it will be at $50 a ton, so no higher than what has been promised before by provinces. And what will end up happening, Vashi, is that money that people spend, whether they're commuting to get to work, if you're driving from Mississauga to Toronto, you have to do it. You have to drive to get to work. You will then be able to use that money. It'll go directly into your own personal savings account. So Canadians are well versed on how specialized savings accounts work. So look, we have registered education savings accounts for our kids. And that's because we know that eventually when we tap into that, it's for a particular use. And so the use on this one will be for a low carbon future. So imagine if someone...
I take your point, but respectfully, the way in which you're representing, for example, the Liberals' carbon tax, it's not as though they're taking all the revenue and then spending it on whatever they want. It's enshrined in law that 90% of it is rebated and the rest is directed back to, for example, the remaining 10%, businesses, schools, hospitals, and municipalities. And that is enshrined in law.
That's really interesting you raise the point, because Mr. Trudeau actually likes to go in front of the camera and say to people that they'll actually get more money from it. And so it is obviously not revenue neutral to some. And so you said 90%. That's because small businesses are cut out completely from that. Farmers, when they're trying to dry their grain, we've heard a testimony, a committee are saying they're seeing natural gas or propane bills going through the roof. Vashi, people that
but they'll still go through the roof with yours. They'll still have to pay a carbon tax with yours. It's just that they'll get the money back, but you're telling them what they can spend it on.
Well, Dan Kelly tweeted out today from the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses that businesses will appreciate it when they pay into something. Then they will be able to then direct that to be able to create a lower carbon footprint for their businesses. That includes the same for farmers. Farmers want to be able to update their equipment and to utilize new techniques for sequestering carbon. That involves capital, and right now, getting hit with a bill, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars under Mr. Trudeau is not working. This plan will allow farmers to be able to do that, whether it be for their household or whether for their small business. Vashi, this is an approach that will work, and Aaron O'Toole is doing the right thing by saying we have to balance our commitments on the environment and make sure we have jobs and investment. Because I tell you, if it goes to $170 a ton, something that is not happening in the United States, we're going to see all of our industry, all of our jobs and investment push south. I can't tolerate that. I know Aaron O'Toole won't tolerate that. I don't think the average Canadian voter wants that either.
With respect, though, those farmers that you speak of will still be hit with a bill under your plan. And you haven't directly addressed the idea of how long your party has again derided and decried the very idea of a carbon tax, that it's ineffective and inefficient, and how you are bringing a carbon tax in now. I know you're calling it a price on carbon. I know Mr. O'Toole did, and I know that the Liberals call it a price on carbon. That's fine. Either way, it's the same thing you criticized about the Liberals. Yes, it doesn't go as high. It's the same concept with a bit of a twist at the end. Even the Taxpayers Federation was critical, saying it's outrageous that O'Toole is now planning to hammer Canadians with higher fuel bills through his very own carbon tax.
So let me just say this again. A tax itself is a compulsory levy that is collected and goes into government revenue. We are not proposing a tax. Instead, we are actually saying we know that people have to get to work. They have to go to get a medical appointment. Those things, they may not have public transit like someone in an urban area, and the carbon tax, Mr. Trudeau's carbon tax, punishes them. And many small businesses are floundering now, not just because of COVID, but because of the high cost under Mr. Trudeau. And going from $40 a ton that it is today to $170, that's not going to work. What will work is an alternative approach where if someone puts $1 in on a price on carbon, they're going to see their household account or their small business account see $1 credit. Then they're going to see.
But they'll have to spend that money on what you tell them they can.
Well, I would say we're giving them a choice. It's just like I said with an RESP. You don't get to spend it on anything, on everything, but you do get to spend on what's important, your child's education, making sure that they can eat, making sure they can pay their tuition and their school books.
But you have a choice of whether to invest in an RESP.
But
you don't have a choice at the pump under your plan.
Well, so let's just put this in context. If you're a commuter going from Vaughan and you're driving right now to Toronto and you have to do it for work, right now you're paying that carbon tax and it gets redistributed by Mr. Trudeau, who then gives that money to other people who actually have public transit options. And so it's unfair to them. Instead, let's put the money into a household account for them so that it encourages them. So they say, oh, wow, I could get in an electric vehicle, or I could just simply go to an e-bike. And that puts they could get public transit tickets. Vashi. They could put a solar panel on their home. They could insulate their home. I have seniors in my riding with 100-year-old homes. And you know what, they complain to me that they pay more in their carbon tax than they do in their natural gas, but they don't have the money to insulate their home or change their heating system. This is the way forward to do that. You know, we can grow the economy, we can stop carbon leakage to the United States, and we can meet our goals. And that's going to take some brave thinking. Mr. O'Toole's done that today.
So what happens, Mr. Albas, if, like under the current government's carbon plan, provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan say, we're not game for this, we're not down for it, we do think it's a carbon tax, we don't want to apply it to people who live in our provinces. Would a Conservative government impose this plan onto those provinces?
So, as I've said on your program here before, Vashi, Mr. O'Toole, as Prime Minister, will work with provinces and territories. They should be our partners, not our punching bags. And instead of putting, from saying that the carbon tax is going to go from $50 a ton, like Mr. Trudeau did, to $170 a ton without any consultation, that's bonkers. But let me tell you, when Mr. O'Toole, Prime Minister O'Toole, sits down with the premiers, if a particular province and premier says, you know what, we like our own regime, we believe it is equivalent to this, then we will allow an equivalency agreement to go forward. That's how cooperative federalism is supposed to work. But Canadians want to know that they have a prime minister that is thinking of the big picture, but also thinking to make sure that let's think of people, not for them. Let's put money instead of going towards a redistribution program where small businesses, seniors, and commuters are thrown under the bus. Let's make sure that we can help them to lower their own footprint, to make choices, and then to have the money to be able to do that. That's what these personal low carbon savings accounts and small business accounts are about, Vashi.
So just to be clear, Mr. Albas, if those provinces were to say, we believe our plan is equivalent, a Conservative government would just accept that? Or does that government have to, would that federal government have to assess that it actually is equivalent? And what happens if it's not?
Well, Vashi, we do have commitments we've made as a country. Both provinces have set targets that went to Paris. And so what would happen is that they would have to just demonstrate that their plan has equivalency.
But if it doesn't, will you impose the plan you introduced today on them?
Oh, I would say, Vashi, first of all, I think a lot of provinces are going to want to see this plan, and they're also going to want to look under the hood, kick the tires, and to make sure it's right for their population. And today, we kicked that conversation off, and as Prime Minister Aaron O'Toole will listen to the premiers, work together. In the plan, we haven't even talked about working with the administration in the United States so that we can see things like a proper electric vehicle mandate, so that we can see standards that we can see roll out North America wide, so we don't have carbon leakage, where when we take a step of action towards climate change, it actually pushes jobs down to the United States. We have an integrated union, and that's one thing we have to understand, where our economy
there's more to the plan. I gotcha. And we'll present it throughout the show, I promise.
Bring it back,
but
we can talk about
we will, I'm sure, over the coming months, whenever that election, heading into the election. Just quickly, though, you didn't directly answer the question about what happens if the plans aren't equivalent, if they don't meet the standards that you set forth, or the targets, rather, if they won't get the country to the targets that your party has now agreed on. If a province's plan falls short, will you have to use your plan as a backstop?
Well, originally, Prime Minister Trudeau said that he would only accept a cap-and-trade system like you have in Quebec, or a carbon tax.
But I'm asking about a Conservative government.
And no, but I'm just saying. And there was, after that agreement with the provinces, there was further discussions that allowed, where they said, okay, well, let's have the EPS system, or pardon me, the OPS system in Ontario, or the Alberta system, the tier regulations. So, Vashi, we're going to work with provinces, and we're going to see what their ideas are, but we're also going to give them the information to see how great this plan is. That's how things work forward. You don't just get to decide like a fiat. Well, I guess Mr. Trudeau does, where you say $50 a carbon, for a ton of carbon, to 170, and you're not even letting the premiers know ahead of time that was coming. That's disrespectful. Prime Minister O'Toole will take a different tack.
Okay, Mr. Albas, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, as always.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.